right, let's get started. I'm really thrilled to see how many people have joined us tonight to chat with author David B. Williams. I'm really excited to hear him talk about his new book and his writing life. My name is Shannon Rilbecki. I'm the Senior Director of Advancement at the Mountaineers. And I'm sure, as many of you know, Mountaineers Books is part of the Mountaineers organization. And together we share a mission to enrich the community by helping people explore, conserve, learn about, and enjoy the lands and waters of the Pacific Northwest and beyond. Mountaineers Books launched with the first publication of Freedom of the Hills in 1960 and has grown significantly over the last 66 years with multiple imprints, Skipstone, Braided River, and Mountaineers Books. We have over 700 titles in print, release approximately 30 publications annually, and last sold 440,000 units domestically and globally. Mountaineers Books is the leading independent publisher of outdoor books in the US. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. To keep our audio focused on David and Emily, please be sure to keep your screens muted. We do welcome your questions, and we'll be holding the last 15 minutes or so to answer them. So please put your questions in the chat, and we'll hand them off to David and Emily during the Q&A. After the presentation, please stick around for another moment to hear how we can get your name or the name of a loved one printed in David's new book. Now, without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce our presenters for this evening. David B. Williams is an author and naturalist whose award-winning books include Home Waters, A Human and Natural History of Puget Sound, and Too High and Too Steep, Reshaping Seattle's Topography. His work has twice been recognized as a finalist for the Washington State Book Award. For more than 25 years, he has been leading walks and giving talks, weaving together the human and natural history of Seattle, his home. David also publishes a free weekly newsletter, Street Smart Naturalist, Explorations of the Urban Kind. He has been called an evangelist for the practice of paying attention. And Emily White is an acquisitions editor at Mountaineers Books, where she collaborates with authors, designers, fellow editors, and artists to create books that deepen our understanding of the natural world. Welcome, David. Welcome, Emily. And now, Emily, over to you.
Thank you, Shannon. Thanks everyone for joining us tonight. David, I am going to have you kick this off by just telling us a bit about the origin story for Fire and Ice. That's my nickname or shorthand for In the Range of Fire and Ice, A Human and Natural History of Washington's Cascades. If you just want to get us started in your own words of what this book is about.
Great. Well, thank you, Emily. Thank you, Shannon. It's certainly an honor and pleasure to be here tonight. And thank you to everyone who's attending. This is so much fun to be able to share these stories of this book. And before, I'm going to show a handful of slides, but I just sort of want to begin with the fact that Emily and I have been involved with this book since the very beginning, in the sense that even before I'd written a proposal, we started chatting about this book. And so one of the privileges for me of working with her and with Mountaineers is that relationship that we've had. Emily and I have been friends for more than a dozen years since I did a first book for Mountaineers called Cairns many, many years ago. So I think that relationship is really essential to this book. And let me just do a quick share screen with you all if I can figure out the technology to show a few images. And yeah, so the book really grew out of this desire to continue to explore the place that I love. I've lived in Seattle for most of my life, and as Shannon said, have been written extensively about it, and knew that I wanted to go up in the mountains and think about those relationships between people and place. How have we impacted landscape, and then how has landscape impacted us? And in looking at the Cascades, I knew I wanted to just focus on the state. I really think of myself as very much a local, a very sort of hyper-local writer, and I'm expanding out to the entire state. So that's the limits of the stories. And I knew I wanted to do a deep dive into the history, and I wanted to weave in stories that tied in the long stories of this place. We know that people have been involved in the Cascades for more than 10,000 years. one of the stories that I wanted to look at, and it gets woven throughout the book, is our indigenous stories. I've been fortunate to go out in the field with a variety of Native people, but also have conversations with them about these stories. So, for example, this happens to be a story of an image of people going over Snoqualmie Pass just 100 years or so ago, and yet people we know have been going over that pass for thousands of years and looking. And I wanted to explore the difference between how people saw and see the mountain as an opportunity, and how for a long period non-native people, the European settlers, saw the mountains as a barrier. So that theme gets sort of woven throughout in the book. There are 11 chapters in it. They deal with geology, huckleberries, mining, fishing, all sorts of things. There is a chapter on mining and Monte Cristo. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Monte Cristo and that story of this astounding place, really the only mining, really sort of large scale mining in the area. So I weave that story, tell the story of it, how it tied in with Rockefeller funding it, and how basically one storm, what we used to call Pineapple Expresses, and I'm going to use that because I love that name. Pineapple Express basically shut down Monte Cristo. But then I go deeper back in time, and again, looking at indigenous people and how they have been using the mountains, mining and coring them for many thousands of years. Sorry, I'm just making an advance. And of course, I talk about glaciers. This is one of my favorite pictures, 1915, just above the bridge across the Nisqually River at Rainier. And this is in the background here, Nisqually Glacier, a lot closer than it is right now. So tying in the story of glaciers, but also, of course, tying in climate change to it, this whole place. As I said, looking at huckleberries, indigenous people, again, this story that's woven throughout the importance of huckleberry, arguably the most important plant in the mountains for indigenous people and for many modern people. What is life? Life doesn't get much better than waking up and picking huckleberries in a camp and eating them for breakfast. I mean, that's life at its best in this area. And then also weaving in the natural history. So for me, this book is, in some sense, it's a biography of place. It's telling the story of these amazing mountains through a variety of different lenses, from, as I said, glaciers to huckleberries to fire, and always with this goal of understanding, how do we relate to the mountains? How do the mountains relate to us? What are the interactions between the people, the geology, the plants, the animals that really flesh out? I mean, these are amazing mountains. We all know we are blessed by these mountains, and that was really my goal: is how do I tell the story of these mountains? Hopefully, bringing stronger connections for people, for readers, but also the ultimate goal is getting people out and exploring this place, because we are just so lucky to have these mountains. So that's what the book's about. And I'm going to stop my screen share. Is that okay, Emily?
That's okay. Um, David, is there something more you'd want to say, like why this particular book now? How does it sort of
Couple.
fit into what you've been writing about over the years?
Yeah, I mean, it fits in a couple of ways in the sort of why now. One, so as I said at the beginning, much of my writing was focused very locally on Seattle. I ended up writing a book about Puget Sound, again, human and natural history. I'm always, again, interested in those connections. In some ways, it was very logical to head up into the mountains, but I also think with the mountains, the Cascades, I think probably many of us recognize they are more popular than ever. They are face many threats right now, obviously climate change being one of the big ones, but there's also some really positive stories that I wanted to explore in the mountains. Wolverines have come back to the Cascades, Cascade red fox, lynx. So there's this aspect of the mountains that we are seeing more and more of them. And so I want people again to hopefully have come away from reading the book with a better relationship and thoughts about how they fit in and how that history is woven in. I mean, I know as a geologist, I look at the mountains and I see these multiple layers of the geology. But in working on this book, I've come to now see the multiple layers of people in the mountains through
Mm.
this 12,000, 10,000 year plus history. So that's why.
Um, I wanted to read a little from we're still mid-process on the manuscript. It's in layout stages right now, but I am going to read some of David's writing. And early on in the book, you talk about how my earliest memory of being in the Cascades is of hiking with my parents. They weren't hardcore hikers, and we never backpacked, but the trailheads were just an hour away. My parents had long enjoyed walking. Going to the trails was another way to get to know the place they called home and perhaps to instill in me a love for the mountains. And I'm sure that's something that many people here tonight, also have their own love for the Cascades and have been introduced to it in different ways. And I'm wondering, you spoke to this a little before, but in what ways has this project helped? Do you see the Cascades through a new lens, or sort of has anything major sort of shifted in your perspective?
Yeah, and it's a good question. For me, I always think I know a place until I start writing about it and I realize how little I know. Again, this realization that these mountains are unique. I mean, there's no other place in the lower 48 that has our volcanoes like we do, along with glaciers like we do. So there's that magical connection, again, the fire and ice of the book, but also, the diversity in the mountains. I had sensed it, but for instance, I think hiking in the mountains, I had the sort of typical love affair with Douglas fir and the sort of quintessential tree of the mountains. But my new love affair is with white bark pine. I had never really thought about them as a tree, this lovely high elevation tree, often on these windswept ridges, often in that sort of Krumholtz stunted growth, and just stunningly beautiful trees in the landscape. And yet they also have this incredible relationship with Clark's nutcracker, this wonderful bird, this very smart, very engaging bird, and came to the realization that basically almost every white bark pine tree that we see in the mountains was planted by a Clark's nutcracker. And I think that is a stunning thing to say. Most everything else was planted happenstance, fur, and feathers, or I mean, seeds caught on something. But the Clark's nutcracker plants them. And so that relationship to me just sort of exemplifies that bond between different species on the mountain. And for me, I've come away with just my bonds to the mountains have just grown by knowing these stories and learning them and being more aware of the beauty, the history, and the uniqueness of it, and how those all sort of weave together to create a place that I love. I mean, I feel blessed that I live here and I have the ability to get into the mountains. And even if I'm not in them, I mean, how many of us have felt we look out and we see the Cascades and you're like, oh my God, this is so great. And it feeds our soul. And the mountains feed my soul. And that was what I hope doing in this book is helping people help nourish that even more. I don't know if I do it, but that was my goal, a goal.
Um, well, you've changed my perspective since I've been working with you on this book. So just in many ways I admit I have grown used to white bark pines and going by them and not and just everything you uncover and talk about white bark pines, just as one example in your manuscript, I'm now a full-on white bark pine fanatic. So thank you for that. I want to talk about superlatives. As you mentioned, and I'll read your writing, the Cascades are unique. No other mountain range in the lower 48 has active volcanoes, nor are any others so dominated by glaciers. Fire and ice, these elemental forces are what define the Cascades. They shape and continue to shape them and have affected every aspect of the mountains, from their singular ecology to the more 10,000 years of human history to their beauty. And I was wondering, you and I were talking the other day about a friend of yours based in the UK who is a big fan of the Cascades. And I was just thinking of that if you're taking someone to visit the Cascades for the first time, what are some of the superlatives that you would be, running by them? What is like your feature list?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to beat the ice. I mean, the ice is such a lovely feature, the glaciers of these mountains, and that how that has shaped the land and shaped how we move through the landscape. And I think also I would stress that they are dynamic mountains. They are young mountains that are constantly
Mm.
reshaping themselves. I mean, I think at some point in the book, I call them shapeshifters in the sense that there's always something going on, whether it's an eruption, it's glaciers, it's landslides. So that aspect of it to me is a really powerful aspect of the place. And I think it's on a big scale and a small scale. As we've talked about this too, Emily. One of the things, and maybe you'll bring it up later, is pica. I love, that is an animal I would stress. I mean, I love pica. They didn't get a whole chapter in the book, but what I tried to do in the book is throughout the manuscript, picas just show up in the book for a paragraph, maybe 3 or 4 paragraphs, and then they disappear, just sort of like they do in the mountains. But to me, there's so many animals, and I was only able to pick a handful. As I said, the wolverines, mountain goat, but pikas are also in there and a variety of others. So there's that. And then there's the geology that I think we also think of as fairly, I'm guessing probably many of us think geology, we think volcanoes, but you go into the North Cascades and the geologic story in the North Cascades is just out of this world. A geologist I know calls it some of the most complicated geology in the country. And it's that part of the Cascades with that great relief. And he made this point, which I just think I tried to stress in the book, is that the mountains, particularly the North Cascades, he stresses, exist as a feature because of erosion. Erosion is what creates the mountains. It's those great valleys. If there wasn't erosion, the mountains it would just be a plateau. And so I would stress that aspect. And that gets back to the glacial story. It gets back to the rain, that we have so much water, we have erosion, it's that we have volcanoes. There's that dynamic, and I'll say it again, it's just so central to the story of this place. And that's what I would stress. And just, of course, they're the most beautiful mountains. So, duh. Come on, Emily.
I want to remind, and for anyone who's just joined the group here, put your questions in the chat, and the moderators are going to collect those, and we'll be able to share some at the end of my conversation here with David. And speaking of rocks, geology, you wrote that I have long sought out, hiked across several of the serpentine barrens in the Cascades. I find it amazing that high atop these alpine ridges, I can see the viscera of our planet, shaped by geological forces. Standing here, I wonder, should I think of myself as standing on a mountain, or on oceanic rock, or on rock that originated deep in the earth? If I hike on one of our volcanoes, am I somewhere that's more truly Cascadian because the rocks form directly under my feet? What I call the Cascades is not merely one place or of one time or of one environment. It's an amalgamation of places assembled by a restless planet. And so, David, you are a self-described geology geek, rock nerd. If you could spend time camping near any particular type of rock in the Cascades, what would it be? I know that's a hard question.
Well, I mean, it's hard to beat I mean, I love the Serpentine Barrens. Those of you who've been hiking in the mountains, what I'm referencing to, or those who haven't, those areas, there's some really lovely ones in the Tianaway, like going up Iron Peak, where you come across this area and it's just like there's no plants and there's this unusual geology there. Serpentine or serpentinite is a type of rock that has a different chemistry than most of the rest of the Cascades. And so only certain plants grow there. And there's just a magic to that landscape. So I love Serpentine Barrens. And, you know, in working on the book, the area that sort of has become my favorite place in the mountains uh, is Mount St. Helens. I mean, that geology down there, again, that dynamic of the geology, but it's not, I think we think of many of us think of the volcano and that eruption and the geologic story of the Cascades and Mount St. Helens. But what to me, and both the Serpentine Barrens and Mount St. Helens illustrate, is that the plant life we see, the flora, the fauna, the animals are tied intimately to that geological story, that everything interacts together. And that's what throughout the book I try to make those connections that when we out there and see that serpentine barren and we see a certain type of plants that ties back to the soil. When we're down at Mount St. Helens and you're out on the Pumice Plain and you see this area that many of us are familiar with, that the illustrations, the photos from 1980, the eruption, this just desolate place, and you go there now and the array of life is just astounding, hopeful, beautiful. And so for me, that again, it's those connections. It's not just the connections between me and place, between us and place, but between that flora, the fauna, and the geology. So Mount St. Helens uh, is one of my favorite spots. The Serpentine Barrens, another. I just think that's sort of incredible. And to think that I'm also on a landscape where I'm on rock that's what 30 years old, 50 years old. That's pretty cool. When we have rock in the Cascades, date back several 100 million years. So yeah, it's all cool. It's all anywhere there's rock, it's great. Come on, Emily, we know that.
Um, so in this book, you went about it through a range of different research, but you spent a lot of time out in the field. You spent time with geologists, fire ecologists, glaciologists, ornithologists, historians, biologists. Um, can you speak a little to doing that field research? I mean, one, just gratitude to all those people who took time to
Hmm.
take you out and share some of their research with you. And maybe if you could just speak to that experience and perhaps, a surprising discovery during
Mm.
some of that field research.
Yeah, I mean, I'll sort of back up a little bit, Emily. So about 15 years ago, I decided that I wanted to just focus on this place where I live. I wanted to be a very place-based, very local writer because I wanted to develop those long-term relationships to place that help me see the pictures better than if I just dropped in. And again, many people do that and do it beautifully. It's not my style. And so part of that is, excuse me, is going out in the field with people who know more than I do and to be able to draw from their knowledge, but then put it in with the picture. So, I went to the Pumice Plain of Mount St. Helens, I think 3 or 4 times with researchers to see it. One of the highlights was going out with a member of the Tulalip tribe up into there's a huckleberry area that they have that's been set aside specifically for the Tulalip tribes, and to be able to see that place through his eyes, through that long-term relationship. And as a writer, that's what I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to, when I'm out in the field, I'm trying to be the eyes of the reader and hopefully write in a way that is engaging enough that they feel that passion that I'm experiencing through these people. Whether it is, I spent time with someone carrying fish up to a lake and depositing fish in that lake. I mean, they were little fish, but that experience, I couldn't get it reading it, but to be able to actually go in and release the fish, to go out in the field with the geologist and have him point out things to me that like, wow, I never really thought of that. And even though I'm a geologist, I mean, I'm a geo geek. There are people who are way geekier than me. Um, and there's fun stuff. I got to go out onto the Nisqually Glacier. We were going out, uh, sort of ridiculous story, but you know me. There was this white mound that looked about this white thing about this big, looked like a pinto bean, but it was white, and it turned out to be the stomach of either a mountain goat or a deer that had been killed and the viscera strung out. And I don't know, that was just sort of fascinating to see. I wouldn't call it exciting. I'm not sure everyone really wants to see it. But again, to be able to see the place, see the landscape through people who bring a deeper knowledge and often a very interconnected knowledge that I can sort of feed off of and hopefully bring my own experiences to bear and my understanding through what they're sharing with me. So I don't know if that answers your question or not. A
No, that
surprise to me again was just uh, I think part of it was I'd seen mountain goats, but to actually go out and really focus on looking at mountain goats and seeing them, trying to find their fur, their wool, watching them, that was really fun. I mean, they're big animals. Something I think they're an animal that many people who hike in the Cascades have a really strong relationship. They're also really scary. I mean, these are serious animals. So yeah.
um I wanted to know if you could, out of all the wildlife in the Cascades, and you do touch on a lot, but you particularly zeroed in on wolverines as a mammal to focus on. Um, what is it about wolverines that you wanted to really dig into that story?
How much time do we have? Um, Wolverines, I think, I mean, I wanted to focus on a carnivore. As I said at the very beginning of this talk, wolverines have returned. And I think one of the changes that's occurred in the mountains over the last 30 or 40 years is the relationship that people have with carnivores, these big animals, that we see them returning, that we're recognizing that this landscape without the carnivores is, for want of better analogy, like a book with missing chapters. And we know that there's a story there, and we just don't sense it. So I wanted to choose an animal that I think people knew a little bit about, but didn't know a lot about. I'm always interested in exploring stories of plants and animals that maybe haven't been explored as much. So I was really lucky to be able to connect with a couple researchers at the Woodland Park Zoo to go out, and wolverines are just these incredible animals that they have this reputation of being, sort of nasty, evil brutes. They have this tenaciousness of life. And I was lucky enough to go out there. They've been setting up cameras around the Cascades to try and document how many wolverines do we have. And got to see this great video of a wolverine that, for want of a better term, is breakdancing at the base of this tree. And it was just such a wonderful thing to see this animal through these series of photos. But, they're survivors. They're animals that we basically extirpated from the mountains for decades, and they've come back. And what does that say about us? What does it say about them? How do we, now that this animal's returned, how do we learn to live with these animals? How do we learn to be part of that family of wolverines in the mountains? And so, yeah, they're cool animals. There's some great history about them, unfortunately, I didn't see one. I'd love to see one, unfortunately, but I got to see them one breakdance. So, as you know, you've read the chapter.
Um, what do you think? Did you have a chapter that felt like the hardest to write or to sort of figure out the themes of it?
Yeah, fire. So I long knew that I wanted to do a chapter about fire in the Cascades, and it was the last chapter I wrote because all the other ones just kept falling and like, okay, I get that one. Okay, I sort of get that one. But I didn't know how to do fire. I went through a variety of different ways. I thought I was going to focus on hike up one mountain and describe the different zones and weave in the story of fire there. I thought another I would go and stand out lookouts and look at that, but ultimately was lucky enough to go out in the field with a couple of researchers and have some really good interviews to get this understanding again of this long-term story of fire and this realization that I think we tend to think of the Cascades, certainly the wet side, as not burning that much. And yet, when the ecologists look at the story, we realize there's this multi-thousand year record of people of fire, and it ties directly to people. It ties directly to native people in the landscape and that relationship to fire and how the map they helped shape how this coexistence between fire, people, and the mountains is so essential. And it finally just sort of, as I kept writing, I realized that we going back and forth between these two, and I do include fire lookouts because there's some wonderful fire lookouts that help me tell the story. And then also came to learn about this fire, the 1902 Yakult burn down in Southwest Washington, which was for many years, it may still arguably be, we don't have exact numbers, the biggest and certainly the deadliest fire in Washington state history. And I basically argue that this fire set the story and framework for how we've managed fire for over a century in Washington from this one massive, massive burn. And it was just and really fun to be able to tell that story. And that then informed my understanding of fire. And again, it's both West Side, East Side people always involved in it. So, yeah.
Do you have a do you have a favorite part of the book that maybe turned out sort of even better than you expected? And I admit my favorite part is possibly the pikas. I do love how they pop up and appear throughout the book, but also how you use them as this great representation of adaptation and resilience. They're also such joyful little
Yeah.
animals. So maybe I stole your favorite part, so you have to pick another favorite part.
um, well, maybe I'll say what my sort of favorite single time in it was at Cascade Pass. My wife
Mm.
Marjorie and I hiked up to Cascade Pass and spent a couple days up there. And we were there right after one of the big burns, not one of the sort of smoky times. And we were basically up there by ourselves up on the Sahali Arm, way up high. And this just amazing storm came in, and we were just sort of being cuffed and buffeted by wind and rain. I mean, we've probably many of us have experienced that, but it was such an incredible dynamic. And then to go out the next morning and see it clear and this beautiful, beautiful landscape. But you also then below us in the Cascade River Valley below us, the clouds coming in and the clouds coming sort of up towards this pass. And I'd gone to the pass not just because I'd heard so much about it, but I also knew that there's a 10,000 year story of people at that pass. There's this incredible
Mhm.
archaeological dig that was done there. And I could see the clouds coming up the valley and coming over the pass. And I just felt like that was such a great illustration. That's what people have been doing for so long of seeing this little gap, finding an opportunity in the mountains. And I think, as I said at the very beginning, also that I think one of the changes that's occurred in the mountains is whereas indigenous people, as I said, long saw and see the mountains as an opportunity, non-native people seeing them as a barrier. I think that's been this fundamental change is that many people now are seeing the mountains as an opportunity and an opportunity to make connections. This through a variety of reasons, whether they're going for birding, geology, just to hike, to climb, to experience the sublime, however you want to define it. So the Cascade Pass was just a magical moment for the couple days we were up there, and to see that place and experience that place. And so to try and move it. And then, as you know, I got to see the very great highlight of the National Park Service flying in the new outhouses or the new cans, and they were substituting out the pit toilets up there. And how could you complain about something so exciting? I mean, that was great,
Right. But that's the kind of behind the scenes.
so to speak. But
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah, there's some bad humor in the book. I'll just warn everyone. Emily tried to get rid of it, but
We're actually kind of closing in on the end of our discussion. So maybe I wanted to say, you and I debated whether this book needed an epilogue
mhm.
to close it, but then you and I agreed that writing about Mount St. Helens was really the right way to end this story. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I sort of mentioned tied a little bit to it throughout. So the last chapter focuses just on Mount St. Helens and that story, and primarily that ecological story of the Cascades and this sense of the dynamic, the sense that the mountain, excuse me, blew up. We had this desolate landscape, and then life came back. Life came back to this place in ways that were completely unexpected. It rewrote the story of ecology for the mountain, but also for the world. This is this idea of succession of how landscapes recover. To me, was such an essential thing that were these lessons have been taken literally all over the world to understand recovery. And out of that, I came away with this sense of this is a story, as I said a little bit earlier, that's been going on for thousands of years. These are mountains that have gone through constant change and constant recovery in the sense of, regreening themselves. And through that, I just found this incredible hope and inspiration. And as a writer, that's one of the things I try to do is I want to I want to try and offer hope. And to me, Mount St. Helens is incredible for that. I mean, I was lucky enough, I got to hike up into the crater and see the glacier up there. So the youngest glacier on the planet is in the crater of Mount St. Helens. It was split in half in the 2007 or 2004, I forget exactly, the eruptive cycle after the second eruptive cycle split this glacier in half, and it came back together. And that just, we know that glaciers are suffering around the planet, and yet here's one that's growing, and it's in a landscape of incredible beauty. And so the inspiration, the hope, and it really just sort of brought everything together. The researchers, the story of indigenous people, all of it is in that one chapter, that one place, that magical landscape. And yeah, I think it's sort of funny because I think so many people in Seattle, using Seattle because that's their home, go north to hike the North Cascades. They
Mm.
go up, and yet Mount St. Helens, which is not too far, I know it's challenging now, but Mount St. Helens is one of the most stunning places we have, and it just really exemplifies that story of the Cascades that I was trying to tell.
Well, I hate to interrupt because I love this thread you're on, but we have a lot of great questions that I'd love to get to. You ready for that, David?
I'll try.
Well, let's start with an easy one that maybe Emily can answer. When is the book available?
I think we're on track for September of 2026 for it to release. I believe I saw someone confirm in the chat that the pre-order link should be working now. So you can pre-order it tonight if you'd like, and you do. I think that person said you did get a discount.
And I can show you the book. It's right here. Here's the manuscript
That's the
right
cover.
there. Yeah. Oh, I just want to point out, look at that little pica.
That's adorable. All right, let's stay in the book and the writing theme. David, what are a couple of really great books written by others that you may have used as models for Fire and Ice?
Uh, Good question. Yeah, certainly inspired by most of Robert McFarlane's books. Those people who sort of know me uh, recognize that. I mean, his Mountains of the Mind, I think, was just this incredible story of place. Long been one of my favorite books. I was inspired by William O. Douglas's Of Men and Mountains, a book that maybe people aren't familiar with. The Supreme Court justice growing up in the mountains and his stories of the Cascades were just wonderful stories. And so those are a couple that pop into my head immediately that I just found just so engaging of the landscape. From a natural history point of view, the Daniel Matthews Cascades and Olympic Natural History book to me is one of my favorites of a field guide related book.
Nice. Thank you. I love this question. Is there any topic you really wanted to include that had to get cut, i.e., kill your darlings, that you want us to know about?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I'm one of those people, once I get into the book and I get deeply focused on it, I sort of linear focus and I don't look at other things in some sense. And I was originally going to write about spotted owls and I didn't because I found the story of the Clark's Nutcracker and Whitebark Pine so amazing and engaging. Um, you know, yet to be honest, really nothing pops into my head. I would probably maybe do a little bit more on some of the plants, but again, I was Huckleberry. Once you go there, where else are you going to go?
Nice. Well, speaking of white bark pine and plants, where can we see an example of a white bark pine in Seattle? Does the Arboretum have any specimens that you're aware of?
There must be, I'm not off the top of my head aware in the Seattle area. I'm again, so often where I'm seeing them is up higher up in the Cascades. Um, One of my favorite places to see them is up either Mount Aches or Navajo Pass. Those areas, I just think they're just such beautiful, stunning trees.
Where in the Cascades are we likely to see a red fox?
In the higher elevations, uh, like down by Rainier, you have a chance of seeing them down there. It's interesting. The Cascades red fox is a unique species unique to the Cascades. There's a lower elevation red fox. They're the same species, but this is a different subspecies. So again, higher elevation, your chance of seeing them sadly are pretty slim, but Rainier is a great place to have the chance of see both wolverines and the Cascade red fox.
Nice. And a few questions about geology. Can you
Ooh.
talk about the influence of plate tectonics on the Cascades?
Yeah, there's a little bit. Is that enough? Um, so there's two ways we can look at plate tectonics. We can look at recent plate tectonics and we can look at old plate tectonics. So from a recent point of view, and by recent I mean the last 30, 40 million years and then much more recent is initially the Farallon plate, now the Juan de Fuca plate, subducting or diving under North America. And as it dives under North America, it gets deep enough, you start to get melting going on, and that's what makes our volcanoes and have been making volcanoes in this area for about 35, 40 million years. We don't know how many there were in the past, but for instance, we know that the new ones, and I mean new, the five are all under 1 million years old. Again, that alone is it's just astounding. But from a deeper point of view, the North Cascades are built by plate tectonics by little pieces, little puzzle pieces being sutured onto the Cascades up there, and they're in a relationship, sliding over, folding, metamorphosing, and so that's what creates the incredible, complicated topography and geology up there. So if you were to drive, say, the North Cascades Highway, driving across, you're just passing this huge range of geology, and to the south of I-90, the geology is relatively simple. So you have, in some sense, the south exemplifies the young geology, the north exemplifies the old geology of plate tectonics. But it's central. That is the story of the mountains, is plate tectonics.
Incredible. Could you go back further and discuss the formation of the Puget Sound and Salish Sea?
They're actually not that. They're very young. Um, Puget Sound formed during the last ice age, so it's only Puget Sound's only been around for about 15,500 years, so it's very young as this sheet of ice came out of Canada between the Olympics and the Cascades, made it down to about a little bit past Olympia, hung out there for a bit, and then melted or retreated back to the north. And at its greatest extent, it was about 3,000 feet thick in Seattle, about 5,000 feet in Bellingham, and water flowing underneath that ice is actually what carved or etched out Puget Sound. So it's ice, but it's also due to water, and it's a very young landscape. I mean, I said I got excited about 1,000,000 years. That's only 15,500 years. So that's what makes this place is that young and dynamic geology.
All right, we're going to get personal, David. We know your wife, Marjorie, likes to make you custom vests for each new book. Is she working on one for this?
Oh, that's a good question. So I have my last one. So this is for my Wild in Seattle book. I've got my Kingdom pin. Yay, Kingdom. Um, so she has yet to start work on it, but I know she's thinking about it. I think she's actually acquired some of the fabric. And so as Emily well knows, I'm not a fashion template at all, but I do like to sport a good vest. And the reason I've really remained a writer is that I get a new vest every time I write a book. So my wife makes me a new vest. So this one, you've got the Stellar's J. It's got a special pocket. So the next one will be equally as beautiful and exciting,
Perfect.
and I will be just as handsome wearing it as I am now. However you want to define that.
I love it.
There will be a pica on that vest.
There will be a pica on
Calling
that
it
vest.
now.
I love it.
Marjorie, I know you're there.
Could you share a short story of a time your family took you hiking and why it stood out to you?
Yeah, I have a couple. I mean, there's two things I always remember about hiking when I was a kid. I think one was I think we were going up Mount Si. That's what always sticks in my head. It may have been a different place, but hiking with a cup, like a Sierra cup type thing, and my parents saying you can drink from the stream as long as you put your cup in moving water, that you didn't have to worry about giardia. And 50
Mm.
years ago, me being 60 now, that probably maybe wasn't an issue, that I didn't get it. So I love that. I love that story, how the landscape has changed. And then I remember also going up to Rainier when the ice cave, you could go in the ice caves up there, the Paradise Ice
Mm.
Caves, and being in there and that intense crystalline blue in there, it still sticks in my head. It's just one of the most amazing things I've ever seen.
Do you have a favorite place to visit in the Cascades?
Mount St. Helens is high. The other is Mount Dickerman. We go up there almost every year in part because our dog's ashes are up there, and we take her
Oh,
salmon and tequila. I mean, we drink the tequila, but she gets the salmon up there.
nice.
I just love the view. It's one of the most spectacular views in the Cascades. I love that spot. So for many
I love it.
reasons.
One more question we have is why did you decide to publish with Mountaineers Books? What is it about Mountaineers Books that attracted you?
Well, I recognize the clear potential for fame and fortune writing for Mountaineers Books.
Clearly.
Yeah, clearly. Um, so, for a couple of reasons, writing a book about the Cascades, logical. They are the publisher for this part of the world. I knew Emily, and I really valued that relationship. I had one book I did with a national publisher, and it was just, I didn't ever feel connected with the publisher. And that to me is really valuable to be with a group of people who, one, I know support what I'm doing, but then I support what they're doing. To me, what the Mountaineers brings is, the guidebooks get us out, but I think they're getting more and more getting us out and thinking about our relationship to place, about our responsibilities, and they have a responsibility as a publisher, and that was to me was very important of being with a place that I support. I mean, it's we are lucky in Seattle that we have a couple of good small presses, University of Washington and Mountaineers, that are doing things that stress relationships and connections. And the Mountaineers was just so logical for me in writing a book about the mountains. So it's that relationship.
Nice, thank you. And Emily,
Mhm.
what about the other side of that? How does Mountaineers Books support authors and highlight either local authors or authors that don't get a voice elsewhere?
Well, we are independent and a nonprofit, meaning we're not a part of a larger media company, which gives us some more flexibility to, as David says, to stay sort of like more connected to our authors. And while we do publish authors from throughout the US and some internationally, our emphasis has always been regional. And so I often feel, we're able to support a lot of first-time authors. We're able to support a lot of regional stories that, it's probably 90% of book publishing takes place in New York. You'd be hard pressed to find a publisher in New York that would see the value in a story about the Cascade Mountains. I mean, even if you go into any bookstore and the shelves of natural history and nature are they're pretty small. There's not even a lot of publishers who publish books about the outdoors. But I think for Mountaineers Books, being rooted in the Northwest, we just have a long history of tying that Northwest values and passion for the outdoors into what we publish.
Well, thank
May I,
you.
Shannon, may I add something?
Of course, yeah.
The other day, Emily and I were talking about the mountains and this idea that I think when people think of mountains in the US, they think of the Sierra and the Rockies. And yet,
Mm.
the Cascades get overlooked, I think, often. I mean, I've even seen stuff like they put pictures, the publications were looking at mountains and the Cascades are barely mentioned. And yet, that was one of our goals. And I think that's that relationship because the Mountaineers recognizes that, centers that, wants that this was just a perfect relationship for us to be able to me to share this incredible. We all know the Cascades are the coolest mountain range. So, duh. So it was great to be able to be with an organization that I knew got it, as opposed to say writing for a New York publisher that would say, "Oh yeah, the Cascades, that's cute," but
Yeah.
they weren't going to publish it in the first place. So
I actually completely agree with you. Going to the Cascades is what made me want to move out here. So it was a backpacking trip there in 2019 and never looked back. So thank you, Emily and David. It was really great to hear this conversation. Before we sign off tonight, I promised I would share with you all you can get your name or the name of a loved one in David's new book, while also supporting independent nonprofit publishing, helping Mountaineers Books continue to thrive and publish all the incredible titles that fill our bookshelves. With a gift of $250 or more directed to Mountaineers Books, you can get your name or the name of a loved one printed in the range of Fire and Ice. Not only will you be recognized in the book, but depending on the gift level, you can also receive additional benefits from other copies of David's titles to tickets to the Seattle launch of David's book. And the QR code is there, or you can follow the web address to get more information or make a gift directly, or you can reach out to me or Jackson, and we'll put our emails in the chat. But if you want to be in the book, we'd need a commitment by March 16th because that's the deadline for print. So would love to see as many who are passionate about this book or other titles from Mountaineers Books participate. Or if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out. And thank you again, David and Emily. It was a really great talk to you here, and I really enjoyed it myself. So enjoy the rest of your evening.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.